Could a movie be so strange, so messy, and so completely unhinged that daytime television would not dare touch it? The 80s gave us horror, comedy, mutants, zombies, killer clowns, fake aliens, and one of the most shameless rip-offs ever filmed. These were not polite movies. They were midnight accidents waiting to happen. Tonight, we are counting down 9 films that felt too insane for normal hours. And number 1 still feels dangerous. The Evil Dead, 1981. Some horror films creep up on you. The Evil Dead attacks like the camera itself has gone mad. Released in 1981, this low-budget cabin-in-the-woods nightmare turned a simple setup into one of the most intense cult horror experiences of the decade. A group of young friends travel to an isolated cabin, discover a mysterious recording, and accidentally awaken something ancient, cruel, and impossible to control. That sounds familiar now, but back then, The Evil Dead felt raw in a way mainstream horror rarely dared to be. The camera raced through the woods like an unseen predator. The cabin felt less like a location and more like a trap slowly tightening around everyone inside. What made it perfect for midnight screenings was not just the horror, it was the reckless energy. The film looked handmade, dangerous, and strangely alive, as if the filmmakers were willing to risk everything just to shock the audience awake. It became a cult sensation because viewers could feel that madness behind every frame. The Evil Dead did not behave like polite studio horror. It felt like something discovered on a damaged tape after midnight. Loud, strange, relentless, and still one of the most powerful proof points that low-budget horror can hit harder than expensive perfection. Basket Case, 1982. A man walks through New York carrying a locked basket, and the question is not what is inside, it is why everyone keeps getting too close. Released in 1982, Basket Case is the kind of grimy cult movie that could only thrive in the midnight world, where audiences wanted something stranger than normal horror and rougher than polished studio scares. The story follows Dwayne Bradley, a young man arriving in the city with a secret hidden inside a wicker basket, his separated conjoined twin, Belial. From that bizarre idea, the film becomes a mix of revenge story, street-level horror, dark comedy, and low-budget madness. The New York setting gives it a dirty, unpredictable atmosphere, full of cheap hotel rooms, strange strangers, and the feeling that anything could happen around the next corner. What makes Basket Case unforgettable is not perfection. It is personality. The effects are rough, the tone is chaotic, and the whole movie feels like it was smuggled out of a grindhouse basement. But that is exactly why it works. It has the strange confidence of a film that knows it is too weird for normal audiences and does not care. Basket Case is not just a cult movie, it is a midnight dare, and once viewers see the basket move, they keep watching. The Return of the Living Dead, 1985. Some zombie movies want you scared. The Return of the Living Dead wants you laughing, panicking, and wondering why the chaos feels so addictive. Released in 1985, this punk rock horror comedy took the Walking Dead formula and injected it with attitude, noise, and a wicked sense of humor. Instead of slow, silent corpses, these zombies talked, screamed, ran, and demanded brains with unforgettable style. The story begins when 2 warehouse workers accidentally release a military chemical that brings the dead back to life, turning one bad mistake into an all-night disaster. But what makes the film so perfect for midnight viewing is its personality. It is loud, messy, rebellious, and completely aware of how ridiculous everything is. Yet it still delivers real horror underneath the jokes. The graveyard scenes have that perfect late-night atmosphere. Fog, punk fashion, screaming sirens, and the feeling that civilization is collapsing just outside the frame. It also changed zombie pop culture forever by popularizing the idea of zombies craving brains. That one detail became so iconic that many people forget it did not come from the earliest zombie classics. The Return of the Living Dead is not just another undead movie, it is a neon-lit panic attack with a punk soundtrack, proving that horror can be funny without ever becoming harmless. The Toxic Avenger, 1984. This is what happens when a superhero movie falls into a barrel of toxic waste and crawls back out with no interest in good taste. Released in 1984, The Toxic Avenger became one of the most outrageous cult films of the decade and one of the clearest examples of why midnight movies had their own strange kingdom. Before superhero films became polished billion-dollar machines, this one gave audiences Melvin, a bullied janitor from Traumaville who is transformed into a monstrous crime fighter after a cruel prank sends him into toxic chemicals. The result is not sleek, heroic, or noble in the normal sense. It is gross, absurd, violent, and strangely sincere beneath all the slime. That contradiction is what made it unforgettable. The movie mocks superhero myths, small-town corruption, gym culture, bullies, and cheap morality tales, while still giving viewers a bizarre underdog revenge story. It looks rough, moves wildly, and constantly feels like it is daring the audience to walk out. But midnight crowds did the opposite. They leaned in. The Toxic Avenger helped define Trauma's identity as the home of proudly tasteless, low-budget rebellion. It is not a good superhero film in the traditional sense. It is something more dangerous, a filthy, funny, radioactive cult legend that made normal comic book heroes look painfully polite. Killer Clowns from Outer Space, 1988. A circus tent lands from the sky, the clowns step out, and suddenly, childhood itself starts looking suspicious. Released in 1988, Killer Clowns from Outer Space is one of those movies that sounds like a joke until you realize how perfectly it understands nightmare logic. The premise is ridiculous on purpose. Aliens arrive on Earth disguised as grotesque circus clowns, trapping victims in cotton candy cocoons, using balloon animals as tracking devices, and turning carnival gags into bizarre weapons. But that absurdity is exactly why the film became such a midnight cult favorite. It takes something colorful, silly, and familiar, then twists it into something strangely threatening. The clowns are not just funny monsters. They are walking proof that horror can come from the most ridiculous places if the mood is committed enough. The special effects, costumes, and production design give the film a handcrafted charm that modern digital horror often lacks. Every scene feels like a funhouse built by someone with a very strange imagination. What keeps it memorable is the balance. It never becomes too serious, but it also never fully winks at the audience. It commits to the madness. Killer Clowns from Outer Space is not frightening in the traditional sense. It is stranger than that. It is a neon carnival nightmare that feels impossible to forget once the circus music starts. After Hours, 1985. One ordinary man tries to get home from a bad night out, and New York slowly turns into a punishment machine. Released in 1985, After Hours is not a horror movie in the obvious sense, but it absolutely belongs in a midnight lineup because it captures something more unsettling: the fear of being trapped inside a night that refuses to end. The story follows Paul Hackett, a bored office worker who heads into Soho after meeting a mysterious woman. At first, it feels like an awkward romantic misadventure. Then, the night keeps getting worse. Money disappears, strangers misread him, coincidences become threats, and every attempt to escape only pushes him deeper into chaos. What makes the film so hypnotic is how it turns normal city life into a surreal maze. Cafes, apartments, streets, bars, artists, and strangers all seem harmless for a second, then suddenly feel dangerous, absurd, or humiliating. The comedy is dark, nervous, and almost cruel, as if the universe itself is laughing at Paul's panic. That is why After Hours works so well as a late-night film. It does not need monsters, gore, or ghosts. Its monster is the city after midnight, when logic breaks down and every small mistake becomes a trap. It is funny, strange, paranoid, and quietly terrifying. A nightmare wearing the clothes of a comedy. Blood Diner, 1987. Some movies lose control by accident. Blood Diner feels like it threw away the steering wheel on purpose. Released in 1987, this bizarre cult horror comedy is one of the strangest examples of 80s grindhouse madness, the kind of film that seems designed for audiences watching with tired eyes, nervous laughter, and no idea what could happen next. The story follows two brothers who run a vegetarian diner while secretly trying to resurrect an ancient goddess through a series of grotesque rituals. On paper, that already sounds unhinged, but Blood Diner pushes the idea even further with cartoonish gore, wild performances, absurd jokes, and a tone that refuses to settle into anything normal. It is part slasher, part supernatural comedy, part splatter movie, and part bad dream carnival. What makes it perfect for midnight viewing is the feeling that the film is always one scene away from becoming completely impossible to explain. It does not chase realism, elegance, or emotional depth. Instead, it celebrates tasteless chaos with the confidence of a movie that knows exactly how ridiculous it is. The diner setting gives everything a grimy, everyday quality, while the story keeps dragging the viewer into something more outrageous. Blood Diner is not polished horror. It is cult cinema behaving badly, and that is exactly why it survives. UHF, 1989. Before the internet turned random nonsense into entertainment, UHF built an entire television station out of pure chaos. Released in 1989, UHF starred Weird Al Yankovic in a comedy that treated television itself like a toy box, smashing commercials, game shows, action movies, children's programming, and local broadcasting into one strange, fast-moving satire. The story follows George Newman, a daydreaming oddball who suddenly gets the chance to manage a failing UHF station. Instead of making normal television, he fills it with bizarre sketches, strange characters, parody shows, and ideas so ridiculous they feel like channel surfing during a fever dream. That is what makes UHF such a perfect late-night cult pick. It is not dangerous in the horror sense, but it is aggressively unpredictable. One minute it is mocking action films, the next it is parodying educational shows, and then it is throwing another random joke before the audience can fully process the last one. At the time, its weirdness did not fully connect with mainstream box office expectations, but later audiences understood its rhythm better. It feels closer to internet humor before internet humor existed. Fast, absurd, quotable, and proud of being silly. UHF may not be a traditional midnight monster movie, but it absolutely belongs in the club because normal primetime comedy was never this wonderfully scrambled. Mac and Me, 1988. Some films become cult classics because they are brilliant. Mac and Me became unforgettable because viewers could not believe what they were seeing. Released in 1988, this strange family sci-fi adventure is often remembered as one of the most shameless and bizarre attempts to chase the success of E.T. The basic story follows a young boy who befriends a lost alien after the creature's family is accidentally separated from its home. That sounds sweet enough, but the movie's reputation comes from how awkwardly everything is handled. The alien designs are unsettling instead of lovable. The emotional beats often feel forced. The adventure keeps stopping for moments that seem more like advertisements than storytelling. And then there is the infamous fast food dance sequence, a moment so surreal that it feels less like a movie scene and more like a corporate dream that escaped into cinema. Yet that is exactly why Mac and Me became late-night viewing gold. It is not frightening, edgy, or intentionally rebellious like many cult films on this list. Its madness comes from sincerity colliding with obvious imitation and product placement so loud it becomes impossible to ignore. Viewers do not watch Mac and Me because it works perfectly. They watch because it fails in such a fascinating, oddly innocent way. As a midnight movie, it is pure accidental legend. These 9 movies prove the 80s were not afraid to get weird, messy, loud, and completely unpredictable. Some became cult legends because they were brilliant. Others became unforgettable because they were impossible to explain. But every one of them belongs to that strange midnight world where normal rules disappear. Which one would you actually stay up to watch? Comment below, like, share, and subscribe for more forgotten cult madness.